The first sign that something was wrong was not the contacts. It was the contacts' behavior. At 3:19 a.m., the SPY-6 resolved 90 contacts bearing 042 to 068, range 71 to 79 kilometers, altitude 400 to 450 meters, speed 185 kilometers per hour, fixed wing profile, small radar cross-section, GPS-guided approach. 90 contacts was a large but not unprecedented saturation number for this theater. The fire control system classified all 90 as probable one-way attack platforms and began generating engagement solutions. The destroyer is operating in the Red Sea, 190 nautical miles northwest of Aden, conducting an independent patrol in the Houthi constant approach corridor. The ship had been on station for 6 days. The watch team had processed 12 separate threat contacts in that period, none of which had resulted in engagement, and had been monitoring the Houthi launch network's pattern of activity closely enough to have developed an intuitive sense for what a genuine launch looked like and what a probe or a test looked like. This looked like a genuine launch. 90 contacts, coordinated, bearing consistent with coastal launch sites 60 to 80 kilometers inland, altitude and speed profiles matching Shahed 136 variants. What it did not look like was what the SPY-6 electromagnetic environment picture was showing on the secondary display that the electronic warfare officer monitored. The EW display showed radar emissions from the bearing 042 to 068 corridor. The emissions were consistent with the contact's approach. That was expected. What was not expected was a secondary emission signature at 3:19 a.m. plus 9 seconds from a source bearing 100 to 14 to the southeast, behind the ship, from a direction that had no contacts in the tactical picture. A directional, high-bandwidth digital transmission on a frequency band the ship's sensors associated with data injection protocols for network-connected fire control systems. The EW officer flagged it at 3:19 a.m. plus 22 seconds. The TAO was already looking at 90 contacts and computing engagement allocation. He acknowledged the EW flag with a 2-word response. Noted. Continue. He continued with the engagement allocation. The contacts were 11 minutes from SM-6 range. The EW emission was noted in the log and filed for post-engagement analysis. The tactical situation did not permit a pause for secondary emission investigation. What he had not registered in the 22 seconds between the EW flag and his acknowledgement was the precise timing relationship between the emission at bearing 114 and the appearance of the contacts at bearing 042 to 068. Both had occurred at 3:19 a.m. The contacts had appeared at second 0. The emission had appeared at second E. 9 seconds was a plausible transmission latency for a remote data injection into a network-connected combat management system. It was also a plausible coincidence. The TAO did not have time to determine which it was. He proceeded with the engagement. Running count, 3:19 a.m., second 31, 90 contacts bearing 042 to 068, range 74 kilometers, 185 kilometers per hour, altitude 400 to 450 meters. EW anomaly. High bandwidth emission, bearing 114, logged, SM-6 8, SM-2 24, ESSM 32, RAM 21, CIWS 100%. Time to SM-6 range, 10 minutes. Cost, $0. At 3:22 a.m., with the contacts at 66 kilometers, the weapons officer ran the standard pre-engagement confirmation protocol on the contact picture. He was looking for track quality, approach rate consistency, and altitude stability. He found all 3. He was also looking, as a matter of professional habit developed across 4 deployments, at the contacts' mutual spacing. The 90 contacts were spaced at approximately 180 to 220 meters lateral separation within each of the three approach groups. Standard Shahed 136 swarm spacing, consistent with a launch from multiple ground vehicles, deploying simultaneously, consistent with the GPS waypoint separation that the known Houthi launch doctrine used for simultaneous multi-vehicle operations. The spacing was consistent, entirely consistent. In fact, the weapons officer checked the measurement twice. The spacing was more consistent than any prior engagement the ship had processed. Every prior engagement had shown some variation in lateral spacing, the natural result of slight timing differences between individual platform launches from multiple vehicles. This engagement's spacing was uniform to within 12 meters across all three approach groups. 12 meters of variation across 90 platforms launched from multiple ground vehicles over a period of 60 to 90 seconds. The physics of simultaneous launch from multiple independent vehicles did not produce that result. Human-managed launch operations did not produce that result. A fire control system generating simulated contact positions in a pre-computed geometric array could produce that result. Sir. The weapons officer's tone did not change. His voice did not convey urgency because he was not certain enough to convey urgency. The contact spacing is uniform across all 90 tracks. 12 meters maximum variation. That's not physically achievable from a ground launch. The TAO was computing the SM-6 allocation when the weapons officer said it. He stopped the allocation and looked at the contact display for 4 seconds. 4 seconds. The contacts were at 64 kilometers and closing. The EW emission at bearing 114. 9 seconds after first contact appearance. High bandwidth digital transmission on a data injection, protocol frequency, uniform contact spacing to 12 meters across 90 platforms. Stand by on SM-6. Pull up the raw radar returns on the contact picture. I want to see what the SPY-6 is actually detecting versus what the tracking software is showing. The distinction he was asking for was between the raw radar reflection data, what the actual antenna was receiving, and the contact picture the fire control system was presenting after its track algorithm had processed the raw data. In standard operations, these two pictures were functionally identical. A contact in the track picture corresponded to a real radar reflection. Under normal conditions, there was no reason to separate them. The ESWS operator pulled the comparison at 3:23 a.m. The raw return data showed 44 to 47 contact candidates in the bearing 042 to 068 corridor, depending on which sweep cycle was examined. The track picture showed 90 contacts, a difference of 43 to 46 contacts. The fire control system was displaying 90 contacts. The SPY-6 antenna was detecting 44 to 47. 43 to 46 contacts existed only in the software. The EW emission at 3:19 a.m. plus 9 seconds had injected 44 phantom contacts into the ship's fire control software. The injection had used a known vulnerability in the data interface between the ship's electromagnetic environment monitoring system and the Aegis combat management software. A data pathway that had been identified as a potential injection vector in a classified technical assessment 18 months earlier, and for which a software patch had been issued, but not yet applied to this hull, because the patch was in the third queue of the ship's IT maintenance schedule. The patch was awaiting scheduled maintenance. The vulnerability had been waiting for someone to use it. Running count, 3:23 a.m., second 241. Raw radar versus track picture confirmed, 46 real contacts, 44 phantoms. Cyber intrusion confirmed. Manual contact isolation in progress. SM-6, 8 held, SM-2, 24, ESSM, 32, RAM, 21, CIWS 100%. Real contacts 62 kilometers. Correlation time required 89 seconds. Cost $0. Time 4 minutes. At 3:23 a.m., the engagement picture resolved from 90 contacts to approximately 45 real contacts. The phantom contacts were distributed throughout the approach picture, intermixed with real contacts on the same bearings and similar approach vectors. The fire control system did not flag them because they had been injected with track quality parameters set to green. The injection had made them indistinguishable from the real contacts in every display attribute except the one the raw radar comparison had just exposed. The TAO had spent 3 minutes and 44 seconds preparing to engage 90 contacts. He had 4 seconds of SM-6 allocation completed when the weapons officer's observation stopped him. He now had a picture with approximately 45 real contacts and 45 phantom contacts, indistinguishable in the track display except by manually comparing each contact to the raw radar return data. Manual comparison of 90 track files against raw radar data, approximately 45 to 90 seconds per contact pair if done methodically. The contacts were at 62 kilometers and closing. He did not have 45 seconds per contact. Clear all phantom contacts from the picture. Manual isolation, raw radar return correlation. I want the real picture in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. The contacts would close from 62 kilometers to 55 kilometers in 2 minutes. The SM-6 optimal engagement range opened at 72 kilometers. He was already inside the optimal engagement window. Using SM-6 on phantom contacts had just become his most expensive possible mistake. The ESWS operator and the CIC watch officer began the manual correlation process. Raw radar return, contact present or absent. Track file, contact green in the engagement picture. Where the raw return showed no contact but the track file showed 1, phantom. Where both agreed, real. Running count, 3:24 a.m., second 302. Cyber intrusion confirmed. 90 contacts in track picture. Raw radar, 44 to 47 real contacts. 43 to 46 phantoms injected via EW emission at bearing 114. Manual correlation in progress. SM-6-8 held pending correlation. 62 kilometers to real contacts closing. Time to complete manual isolation, estimated 90 to 120 seconds. Cost, $0. Time elapsed, 5 minutes. 5. The manual correlation took 89 seconds. At the end of 89 seconds, the ESWS operator had isolated 46 real contact tracks and marked 44 as phantom. The fire control system was requeried with a filter that suppressed the phantom tracks, and the engagement picture collapsed from 90 contacts to 46. 46 real contacts at 54 kilometers. The 89-second correlation process had consumed 89 seconds of the SM-6 engagement window. The contacts had closed from 62 kilometers to 54 kilometers during the analysis. The outer ring was still available. SM-6 engagement range extended to 150 kilometers, but the optimal engagement geometry for a clean outer ring intercept was typically between 60 and 90 kilometers. The ship was inside that range now. The contacts were closer than they would have been if the engagement had started at the standard outer ring opening. The phantom contacts had not consumed any interceptors. They had consumed the engagement window in which interceptors would have been most effectively used. SM-6 cells 1 through 6 against 6 lead contacts at 51 to 54 kilometers. 3 groups, 2 SM-6 per group, targeting the highest confidence real contacts identified by the correlation process. 6 launches in 2.1 seconds. 4 intercepts, 2 misses. The 2 misses were contacts that had descended from 400 to 120 meters altitude during the correlation analysis delay, the lower altitude changing the SM-6 terminal basket geometry from the parameters computed before the correlation had been completed. The descent had occurred while the TAO was looking at raw radar data rather than managing engagement sequencing. 44 contacts remaining. SM-6 cells 7 and 8. The last two SM-6 against two contacts at 47 kilometers, whose raw radar returns had been among the strongest in the correlation analysis. The most confidently real contacts in the picture. Both intercepted. SM-6 inventory, 0. 42 contacts remaining. Running count. 3:28 a.m., second 568, SM-6 0. 42 real contacts, range 42 to 48 kilometers. Phantom contacts, suppressed from fire control picture. Raw radar correlation, maintaining continuous validation on all remaining tracks. SM-2, 24. ESSM, 32. RAM, 21. CIWS, 100%. EW emission, bearing 114, ceased at 3:23 a.m. Source, unlocated. Cost, $16.8 million. Time, 9 minutes. The EW emission had ceased at 3:23 a.m. Approximately the same time the ESWS operator had begun the manual correlation. The adversary's network intrusion system had apparently detected the correlation process as a response to the injection and had terminated the active emission to avoid further characterization. The phantom contacts remained in the fire control system's suppressed track pool. They had not been deleted, only masked, because deleting them would require a system reboot that the TAO had declined during active engagement. The masking was working. The TAO was watching it work, but he was also watching it with a specific concern. The phantom contacts had been injected with exactly the right behavioral parameters to appear as real Shahed 136 contacts. The adversary who had built that injection knew what Shahed 136 tracks looked like in the Aegis fire control system at the software parameter level. That knowledge came either from a technical compromise of the system specifications or from extensive empirical observation of prior engagements. Both possibilities were troubling for different reasons, and neither could be resolved in the middle of an active engagement. SM-2 cells 1 through 10 against 10, contacts at 32 to 42 kilometers. The SM-2 was now the primary outer ring because SM-6 was exhausted. At 42 kilometers, the SM-2 was at the outer edge of its reliable engagement geometry. 7 intercepts, 3 misses. 2 contacts executing descent maneuvers in the SM-2 terminal phase. 1 contact whose track file had briefly merged with a suppressed phantom during the engagement sequence, causing a 1.8-second guidance interruption. 35 contacts remaining. SM-2 cells 11 through 20. 10 more. 6 intercepts. 4 misses. The suppressed phantom contacts were causing processing load on the fire control system that was producing occasional 0.3 to 0.8-second delays in track file updates. Not enough to prevent engagement. Enough to produce marginally wider basket placement on each SM-2 engagement than standard. 29 contacts remaining. SM-2 cells, 21 through 24. 4 cells, 4 contacts at 22 to 26 kilometers. 3 intercepts, 1 miss. SM-2 inventory, 0. 26 contacts remaining. Running count. 3:33 a.m., second 840, SM-6 0, SM-2 0. 26 contacts, range 16 to 22 kilometers. Fire control system, suppressed phantoms producing processing load, 0.3 to 0.8 seconds, update delays. ESSM 32. RAM 21. CIWS 100%. System reboot, not possible during active engagement. Cost, $44.4 million. Time, 14 minutes. ESSM cells, 1 through 12 against 12 contacts at 12 to 18 kilometers. 8 intercepts, 4 misses. The processing load from the suppressed Phantom track pool was degrading the ESSM semi-active illuminator's update cycle. The illuminator was receiving updated track positions 0.3 to 0.5 seconds later than standard, and at ESSM terminal engagement speeds, that latency translated to basket placement offsets of 15 to 25 meters, 14 contacts remaining. The weapons officer made a call that was not in any doctrine the ship carried. The Phantom suppression is hurting us. Every track file update cycle is carrying the load of 90 contacts instead of 46. We need to cut the suppressed contacts loose. Cutting the Phantom contacts from the system entirely required either a manual deletion of 44 individual track files, a process that would take minutes, or a system partition that isolated the Phantom track pool in a separate processing queue, freeing the main engagement queue from the load they were generating. The system partition was a software function that the Aegis software contained as a maintenance utility. It had never been used during active engagement. The TAO would be partitioning software in real time while ESSM rounds were in flight. Do it. The ESWS operator initiated the partition at 3:35 a.m. The process took 11 seconds. During those 11 seconds, the fire control system was in a transition state. The main engagement picture remained active, but the tracking update rate dropped to 60% of normal as the partition process consumed processing capacity. 4 ESSM rounds in flight during the partition transition received degraded guidance updates for 11 seconds. One of the 4 missed as a result. The guidance gap had been sufficient to place the round outside lethal radius on the final approach. After the partition completed at 3:35 a.m. plus 11 seconds, the fire control system's processing load dropped immediately. Track file update rate returned to standard cycle time. The illuminator resumed full rate updates. The engagement picture was now running cleanly on 46 real contact tracks, with 44 Phantom tracks isolated in a separate partition where they consumed minimal processing resources. Running count 3:36 a.m., second 1011. Software partition complete. Phantoms isolated. Fire control, nominal update rate restored. ESSM 22 remaining. SM-6 0. SM-2 0. 13 contacts at 6 to 10 kilometers. RAM 21. CIWS 100%. Cost $55.2 million. Time 17 minutes. 13 contacts remaining. ESSM cells 13 through 22 against 10 contacts at 7 to 12 kilometers. 8 intercepts, 2 misses, both contacts at sea, skimming altitude below 40 meters, the low altitude approach degrading the ESSM basket as in prior engagements. 3 contacts inside 5 kilometers. RAM cells 1 through 6 against 3 contacts. 2 intercepts, 1 miss, 2 contacts inside 3 kilometers. Running count. 3:37 a.m., second 1086, ESSM, 10 remaining. SM-6 0, SM-2 0, RAM 15, CIWS 100%, 2 contacts at 1.8 to 2.9 kilometers. System partition, complete, 44 Phantoms isolated. Fire control processing, nominal. Cost, $60.9 million. Time, 18 minutes. CIWS forward acquired the first contact at 2,600 meters on bearing 051, a standard altitude contact at 250 meters, descending speed 185 kilometers per hour, clean track in the cleared engagement picture. Burst, 0.7 seconds, 52 rounds, contact fragmented at 2,200 meters, warhead initiated, overpressure and fragment cloud at 2,200 meters produced a minor hull tremor and the brief sound of material against steel. 2 fragment impacts on the forward hull above the waterline, both assessed as surface damage only. The second contact was the sea skimmer that had survived the ESSM pass. At 1,900 meters, altitude 22 meters, the CIWS aft was tracking it in its degraded altitude mode, barrel depressed to near horizontal. The first CIWS burst was interrupted by a processing glitch in the aft mount's tracking computer. A 0.2-second pause in the burst sequence that had not been observed before on this mount, and which the maintenance log would later attribute to a secondary effect of the software partition process on the mount's connected fire control feed. The pause was corrected automatically. The second burst, 1.1 seconds, 82 rounds. Contact fragmented at 1,500 meters. Warhead initiated. Overpressure reached the hull as a sharper event than the first detonation, the closer range amplifying the pressure signature. The hull registered it. CIC registered it. The crew registered it through the deck plating. At 3:39 a.m., the SPY-6, with its cleared contact picture, showed no contacts within 10 kilometers. Both CIWS mounts resumed standby tracking mode. The engagement was complete. Total duration, 20 minutes and 9 seconds. Running count, 3:39 a.m., second 1,229. All 46 real contacts neutralized. Phantom contacts isolated in system partition. SM-6, 0. SM-2, 0. ESSM, 10 remaining. RAM, 15. CIWS-4, 91%, aft, 86%. 2 warhead detonations, 2,200 meters and 1,500 meters. Hull, 2 fragment impacts, non-structural. EW intrusion, logged, source unlocated. Cost, $64.1 million. Time, 20 minutes. The damage assessment at 4:30 a.m. 2 fragment impacts above the waterline on the forward hull. Surface scoring only, no structural effect. Aft CIWS mount, fire control feed, 0.2-second processing anomaly. During partition, root cause under investigation. All systems otherwise fully operational. No crew injuries. The magazine assessment at 4:32 a.m. SM-6, 0 of 8. SM-2, 0 of 24. ESSM, 10 of 32 remaining. RAM, 15 of 21 remaining. CIWS forward, 91%. CIWS aft, 86%. 3 missile systems expended to varying degrees. The outer ring gone. The ship was operating on ESSM, RAM, and CIWS as its remaining defensive layers. The software partition, containing 44 Phantom contact tracks, was still resident in the Aegis system. It would remain there until the system could be rebooted, a process that required the ship to go to a lower readiness state than was currently appropriate. The TAO had declined to authorize a reboot since the engagement and would continue declining until the ship was in a position where a 4-minute vulnerability window was operationally acceptable. In the Houthi threat corridor, that window had not presented itself in 6 days and showed no sign of presenting itself in the next 6. The software patch that would have closed the injection vulnerability was still in the 3rd queue of the IT maintenance schedule. It would be applied at the next scheduled maintenance window. The next scheduled maintenance window was 12 days away. The Command Authority notification was transmitted at 5 a.m. The cyber intrusion had been confirmed, documented, and reported. The injection vector, the data interface between the electromagnetic environment monitoring system and the Aegis combat management software, was identified. The vulnerability was known. The patch existed. The patch had not been applied. The vulnerability had been in the system for 18 months. Someone had found it. The adversary's operation had required 3 conditions. First, the patch uninstalled, observable from the ship's communication signatures. Second, A transmission platform at bearing 114 with bandwidth sufficient for 44 contact injection. Third, injected contacts constructed with accurate Shahed 136 behavioral parameters in the Aegis contact model, implying either extensive signals collection against prior engagements or a supply chain compromise at the specification level. The first condition had been gifted by a maintenance queue. The third was the one the after-action review would spend the most time on. The supply officer assembled the accounting at 7 a.m. 46 Shade 136 one-way attack platforms at $20,000 each, $920,000, launch logistics, $70,000. Cyber intrusion component, development of the injection payload, the transmission platform, the Aegis contact behavioral parameters, was the hardest element to cost because it required either purchased intelligence or original research. Conservative estimate for a state or state-affiliated actor with access to relevant intelligence, $500,000 to $2 million in development cost, amortized across its operational life. Call it $800,000 attributed to this engagement. Total adversary investment, approximately $1.79 million. U.S. munitions expended. 8 SM-6 at $2.1 million to $16.8 million. 24 SM-2 at $1.2 million to $28.8 million. 22 ESSM at $450,000 to $9.9 million. 6 RAM at $900,000 to $5.4 million. CIWS, $22,000. Total, $60.9 million. Exchange ratio, 34-1 in the adversary's favor. The exchange ratio was in the mid-range for this analysis series. It did not fully describe the engagement's strategic result. The strategic result was this: the adversary had successfully executed a cyber intrusion into an active Aegis combat management system during a live engagement, had injected 44 phantom contacts that consumed 4 minutes and 29 seconds of the engagement window at the outer ring, had delayed the SM-6 first launch from the standard 72-kilometer engagement range to a compressed 54-kilometer range, and had caused the loss of 2 additional SM-6 contact opportunities, and an elevated SM-2 and ESSM miss rate throughout the engagement. 44 phantom contacts. They had not cost $1 beyond the injection infrastructure. They had consumed 4 minutes and 29 seconds of the most valuable engagement time available, the outer ring window, and had done it by exploiting a software patch that was 12 days from being applied. The patch could have been applied before this engagement. It had been in the maintenance queue for 18 months. The engagement had been in the planning phase of the adversary's operation for some portion of those 18 months, long enough to develop the injection payload, position the transmission platform, and wait for the ship to arrive in the sector without the patch. The adversary had not built a new weapons system. They had found an unpatched software vulnerability and had built 44 lines of contact data around it. Emergency resupply transmitted at 6:22 a.m. SM-6 and SM-2 full reload, ESSM supplement. ETA 4 days. System reboot to fully purge the phantom contact partition and install the pending software patch, scheduled for the next available operational window. Estimated time to that window, not yet determinable. The 44 phantom contacts were still in the partition. The vulnerability was still open. The patch was still in the queue. The adversary's transmission platform at bearing 114 had ceased emissions at 3:23 a.m. and had not been located. It had not gone anywhere.